Welcome back, everyone. Well, I don't think I'm overstating the case that the mayoral race in Saratoga can really be looked at as a watershed moment. You hear Saratoga called the city in the country, and there's a lot of reasons for that. In this particular election, there are some outside political groups that are coming in to show their support, a lot of organizational, a lot of endorsements. It's really quite an important race. Joining me today is the chair for the Saratoga Springs Democratic Committee, Charles Brown. So welcome, Charles. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here, Jeff. Jesse, thank you.
You know what I got to start with? This is an interview, Charlie Brown and Jesse Jackson. Okay, can we get that? No, we're done with that. Okay.
Yeah, and now we can relax.
Now we can relax. You've been involved in politics going back to when Valerie Keene was.
In Saratoga
correct?
Politics, that's
yes,
correct.
Okay. Tell me about that. Well, what got you involved in politics here in Saratoga?
Well, when I moved into town, I'm a newcomer by many standards. I met Valerie. I saw how hard she was working, how much work was being done, and at one point she said, "Well, we're looking for committee members, and would you be willing?" I'd spent a lifetime being involved mostly with national politics, but some local politics as I got older, and felt that that's part of my civic job, living in a community, and so I joined the committee.
You know, someone with a pretty extensive political background, this particular election, I opened by saying it was a watershed. That's a pretty powerful statement. How are you seeing this?
Well, I am feeling like that. There are many, in general, the last 2 years, we have seen more major issues come in front of our city council than I can remember since I've been in the city. And now we are looking at another series of them, and the largest of which is, are we ready to preserve our city and the country's standing? And what does that look like, and how do we do it? And so I believe that that's the biggest issues we're looking at.
Somewhat controversial this year, and we've done a lot of interviews on this, Charles. Saratoga formed a Pact. Business leaders in town, they fielded a survey, collected the responses, and then made endorsements. That sounds pretty typical for a democracy. One thing I noticed is that all of a sudden things started appearing like surrendering Saratoga's safety, violent crime spikes, we can't trust Joanne Yepsen, Mathieson fails to deliver. Now, while that sounds a little biased, we don't editorialize here, but this seems to be kind of typical attack advertising under that banner of a PAC. And then they wonder why PACs sometimes get a bad reputation. I've spoken with the members of the PAC. I think their intentions are honorable. But what's it like when you see this?
Well, it's distressing. We have worked hard as our committee and with our candidates to keep our, all the work that we do focused on issue, focused on where we would like to see the city go, and not let ourselves knock down the other candidate, knock down the opposition, but discuss those issues with and where we disagree, which is, of course, we even as a democratic community we have a broad range of agreement and disagreements.
Sure.
So the ability to keep it civil and moving towards the right goal. But when we see sort of inflammatory language that is really designed to just discredit the person, not really even necessarily the issues, that I feel is not beneficial for our democracy.
I've got it. Now, you've ID'd, like everyone has pretty much ID'd, 3 areas that are priorities. Development is a big one. Give us just a quick idea where you stand on this development. I
think the term we've been hearing some about is smart development, and I actually think that smart development, Sustainable Saratoga began to use that term a decade ago. If you look throughout the country, development that isn't regulated, that is left to its own devices, we see brownfields everywhere. We see sprawl everywhere. What we don't see are cities like Saratoga Springs. And which is why we all agree that Saratoga Springs is so unique. So smart development, absolutely. I think all of us agree with that, and there's clearly no lack of development in the city. If you watch the changes that have gone over just in the last 5 years,
right.
we're growing at a fairly rapid pace. To keep that development so that it is wise and works for all of us, the whole community, I think that's one of the major questions at hand.
Really dovetailing that is infrastructure. When a city like Saratoga sees this level of growth, it really stresses the infrastructure. And let's face it, Saratoga, like many cities in the Northeast, has infrastructure issues.
They do. We're celebrating our 100-year centennial. Right? Some of our infrastructure are still wood pipes. The question of planning for how we address and look at that infrastructure, and then put together a plan to do the repairs that are in front of us, because they are, probably is going to require some money. And I'm pretty sure no politician wants to say that we're all going to have to dig a little bit to help pay for that if you want the top-notch community that we believe we are. Yeah?
Right.
So we will have to come to what those kinds of costs are going to be, look at them, and be honest about them, and put them in front of us, and start talking about how we address them.
I think both of these lead to the other issue that I hear all the time is the quality of life issue. And let's face it, both the development and both infrastructure have an impact on quality of life, but it also has a lot to do with the green space. It also has a lot to do with the ability to make a minimum wage, or what is the minimum wage, right? What's your position on quality of life, or what's your thought?
Well, certainly, I think there was a question about this on the survey that, I think I would doubt that there's a citizen in the city that doesn't believe, we want to see as rich a quality of life for all our citizens as possible. The question is, what does that mean, and how does it, how do we enhance that? Minimum wage, if we take a look at minimum wage, there's a discussion at the state level about raising that. Certainly in a city that has the sort of level of costs that come with a thriving city, it's pretty tough with to live on minimum wage here. So affordable housing, quality of life issue.
Right.
I think there's been some discussion about our homeless population, and which finally we have seen addressed somewhat over those last 2 years. Code Blue, in the emergency situation, realizing that we need to have a place that our homeless can go so they don't die on our streets. Mayor Yepsen has been, just exceptional at moving that forward, and it is growing at a fine pace for this coming winter, and they're looking at a new structure. She's worked with the White House on, finding homes for the veterans, exactly, and finding, I think, from identifying the veterans here in town and finding homes for all of them. So these are quality of life issues. Does that mean that we can't build, or does that mean that that economic growth is in the way of that? I don't think so. I mean, I think those things can work very much hand in hand. But I drove up Lake Avenue with my 15-year-old daughter, and we went past the development there at St. Clements, and she and her friends went, "Oh my gosh," because a major part of the wonderful pines that were there had to come down for that development. If you were strictly looking at the most financially sound way to do that development, all those trees would come down, because it's easier to put your parking in, it's easier to get your machinery around. But because we have concerned developers in this city, there was a way to make sure that we did that at a minimum, and we kept as much of that growth available. Even though trees are not the easiest things around homes and houses and buildings.
Again, Charles, thanks very much for coming in.
It's been my pleasure, really. Thank you.
See you around town. To see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.